So we did give people a little extra time to go and get some lunch, so we'll probably start in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Again, if you're standing back, there are still some seats up here. If you have an open seat behind you, beside you, raise your hand.
Gonzalo still doesn't have a friend. Somebody's already sitting down next to Gonzalo. He's really feeling on there. No? All right. Well, please come and find a seat. We're going to start in just a minute. Just to let you know how this is going to go today, we have a short presentation that'll kind of go through some of the structure of how 3GPP works, what's going on with their release 15 and other 5G activities. And then we'll have kind of an open session for discussion and for questions to our 3GPP colleagues here. We have a couple of folks in addition to our speaker who are available to answer questions. Look, sit next to Gonzalo. He's been desperately lonely. Now he's got friendly Australians near him. There'll be a barbecue bursting out any second now between the two of them, I can tell. Once again, if you could just hold your questions to the end of the presentation, we'll have a whole Q&A section then. Thanks everybody for attending. It's great to see so many people interested in the cooperation. Thanks very much. George?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here, and thanks for the introduction. So my name is Georg Meyer. Impressed how many people are interested in this topic now. So I'm the current 3GPP CT chairman, and I was asked to present a bit, as said, the backgrounds of what we are doing in 5G, what are the timelines, and especially what are possible areas of collaboration and how should we go for such collaboration, specifically on the 5G issues. We had many discussions on this during the last, I would say, half year. And Alyssa, for example, she joined us at our last plenary meeting in West Palm Beach and presented IETF there. And that was very helpful. It was also quite a good participation, good question and answers. So just for my role as well, I'm the liaison person from 3GPP to IETF. Gonzalo, who has a friend at least in me, right? He is the IETF liaison towards 3GPP, so we share this job. We have also at this meeting the chairman of TSGSA from 3GPP, Eric Gutman, he is here, and CT4 chairman Lionel, whom you also might know as AKA Dime Chair. We will be answering your questions as good as we can after the presentation. And yeah, let's go straight to it. So first a few words on 3GPP, how it's built up, because it's very different to IETF in some sense. So 3GPP is the members of 3GPP, it's a third generation partnership project, so the partners are national or international standards organizations such as H3, ATIS, TSI, and so on. They practically form 3GPP or control 3GPP. 3GPP, then the structure itself is made in 3 TSGs, technical specification groups, radio access network, services and architecture, and core network and terminal. So my job is chairing the TSG-CT. Eric's job is chairing the TSG-SA. And then these TSGs have several working groups below them. Lionel is here, as I said, from CT4, so he's the chair of network of the CT4 group. Our focus, or my focus in this presentation, will mostly be on SA and CT issues, so these are more core-related issues. Radio access network, I first of all have to say I'm not a RAN person, and I don't want to pretend I am. So I will not give you any wrong information, hopefully. The other thing is that most of the collaboration with IETF that we have at the moment is on the core network side anyhow. On top of that, we have the project coordination group, and that is made, or the participation there is from the partners. And then in order to participate in 3GPP, you need to be either an organization or a company who is a member of these partners. So it's not based on individuals, but it's really companies and organizations that send delegates to 3GPP. How do we work? At least on the core network, where we basically focus on here now, is we have 3 stages of specification. We first look at the requirements, then develop an architecture, and from that derive the protocols that we need. Protocols doesn't mean we do them all on our own. We heavily reuse things that are developed somewhere else, especially in the IETF. We will come to that later on. These processes go in parallel, as we also see later. Now, what we are on form of consensus, how we make decision, we are consensus driven, and that is like full consensus. So that is tougher than the rough consensus that you have here. Practically in a room like this, if an issue is discussed and there is a single person in the room who says, I object to this, in 3GPP this couldn't go forward, the issue would need to be rediscussed, or would it need to be changed in order to satisfy all the requirements in the room. We are contribution driven. That means if you have a good idea that 3GPP should be doing, you can develop it on the outside, that's fine, but in order that 3GPP gets aware of it and that we implement it, or at least discuss it, you need to come to our meetings and contribute. Most of the work happens in face-to-face meetings. That's also a bit different to the IETF. So most of the working groups now in the 5G timeline have up to 8 meetings a year, full week meetings. Not all these working groups meet at the same place or at the same time. So this is about, like in 3GPP, about 2,000 people. And we are distributed all over the, at least northern hemisphere. And we have releases with strict deadlines. What did we do so far? Just a quick overview for those people who say, what is 3GPP actually doing? Well, we define the mobile network end-to-end from the UE, the antenna to the core network. We started off with the third generation UMTS. There we still had a packet switch, circuit switch domain and a packet switch domain in parallel. We then, in release 8, came to LTE, made the whole network all IP end-to-end, basically switched off the CS domain and used IMS for a voice service. IMS is based on SIP. This is where we had long collaboration, still have. And now, during the last years, we already went towards 5G with LTE Advanced Pro and paved the way towards it with things like cellular Internet of Things, mission critical push-to-talk, and some early ideas of slicing, traffic steering. But now, what we are doing now is 5G. All the working groups are active now and busy with 5G. And a word in the beginning, so it's not only 3GPP, obviously, who is working on the 5G project. There's a lot of standards bodies and a lot of forums who are interested in this issue, who are working on this issue in their specifications. And one thing that, of course, could happen is that they all define their own flavors of 5G. So we have many little 5Gs around. We have a total fragmentation of the market, and things do not fit together. So I don't think we should do that. We should go for one 5G, We should talk with each other. We are talking with most of these organizations, with all of those that you see here. And they are not all listed. ETSI, NFV, ETSI MEC is missing, for example. And we try to collaborate to really come up with a single 5G, something that will be the next generation's network. So one 5G, please let us talk, please let us work together, please let us avoid fragmentation. So what is 3GPP doing on 5G now? So we're developing it now, and it will be a deployable system. That's important. So we're really doing something in this release 15, where we're in the middle of it already, that will be a product, or that can be implemented in a product that can be put out there, and that should be working end-to-end 5G. And this has to be done by June 2018, September 2018, depends how you look at it. So we are grounding the hype. So far, 5G was practically everything you could put on a slide, or you could have in a mission statement. Now we're really saying, no, we go for something real. These are the timelines that we have. So as I said, we have requirements, architecture, and protocols. And we have 3 main phases. The study phase that's already done, it's closed, release 14. Release 15, that's the one we're in the middle in, where we do now normative work on the architecture already, and where on the protocol side we are studying which protocols to use. And we will go into normative work very, very soon, most likely by September this year we will start. The deadline is second quarter of 2018, so June 2018. This should finish the first phase, should be deployable. Usually what we do, we then grant ourselves 3 more months for exceptions, so we have a bit of time to breathe. And then in parallel already we start with the second phase of 5G, that's release 16, where we have a similar demanding timescale. So what I'm talking about now here, and what I want you to be aware of, is this deadline, September 2018. So we call it freezing a release. Release 15 will be frozen in September 2018. Everything has to be complete. Radio, architecture, protocols, APIs, everything has to be there and has to be ready to be implemented in products. Now, all I will speak of on technical manners in this presentation, you have to be aware these things are currently under heavy discussion in 3GPP. And we have things in our specifications. These things can change at any time, be it requirements, architecture, protocols, you can name it. Anything that is 5G is still subject to change. Of course, we set the framework and we will not doubt everything, but the details, they can change. And in order to follow us, you need to read our specifications. They are updated every few months, and if you really want to get deeper involved into the discussions, you need to follow the work of the working groups, at least some of those where you're interested in. And as I said, they meet every few weeks, so that's a full-time job. Here's some of the documentations. I will not go into detail of those. I just listed them for you. You will get the slides so you can download whatever. These are by far not all. So this is just a selection of those which I regard at the moment as those that are important, that's heavily worked on, and which are basic for 5G. And when you see all these specs, then most likely you say, what the spec? Where should I start from? Where should I get into? What should I read in order to get into this 5G thing? 22261, that's the basic requirements, the high-level requirements. That's a very good starting point where you see what we practically have to fulfill. Is 15 and 16, 23501. That's the architecture spec. There you see more technical details. Though the second one, 501, is heavily worked on at the moment. So if you read it today, it's outdated tomorrow. So you have to keep looking at it. So what is 5G then? Why we are doing it? So we see that the network that we had so far is not really made for the requirements that we see in the future now coming towards us. So we have a lot of new stakeholders, critical communication, Internet of Things. We want a tactile internet, ultra high definition media, and so on and so on. All these buzzwords that we know already. We know that these things, or at least some of these things, come towards us. They will use our network. They want to use our network in a very specific manner. So we have to redesign our network, and that's the basic thing that we do in 5G. So we don't see it anymore so much as a network, but as a flexible enabler platform. We need to open up our core network. We need the resources to allocate them on demand. We need service-based architecture and so on. So ultra-low latency and high reliability are things that are demanded from them, where we also for sure have further cooperation with IETF on these things. So how's the landscape? I try to do it all in one picture. When you do it all in one picture, it's obviously always something wrong, but it should just give an overview. So this is an idea of a 5G system as it's currently under development. So we have the hardware as a base there, and on top of that hardware, we now can instantiate the virtual network end-to-end. So practically you can regard this as a slice. You see the radio access network, the 5G network left and right. And in the middle you see the core network. And then, as I said, you can do slicing. So out of the hardware resources that you have, you can build up several parallel networks due to different needs. We also have a specific access now for narrowband IoT, so for those low power devices that want to connect via our network, we have a specific radio access that is designed specifically for them. And of course, we can also then have slices that give higher performance, higher reliability, and so on, where you can not only connect a phone for broadband services, but you can also have trains, cars, robots, whatever. In addition to that, we open up the core by means of APIs to third-party service providers. So you can have mission-critical, your big data application, web services, whatever you want. As long as you have a contract with the operator underneath it, third parties can use the capabilities of the 3GPP network. Of course, we can connect to the internet. Of course, we provide services to enterprise systems. We can also interwork with the existing LTE network, and we can interwork with the legacy network like 3G or the LTE network. So, what is this what we're doing? So we're coming, as you saw, practically from a telecom-driven world, right? So we had a CS domain and added data by and by. So now we have to rethink our complete network. So from one network fits all, we go to an open and flexible enabler. From telecoms as the main operators or customers that we have, we go to multiple stakeholders. We have now the vertical industries such as mission-critical IoT and so on. Instead of phones that were connected so far, we're now connecting things. Instead of procedures that we defined by means of protocols in our core network and also the access network, we now have to decompose this into services. Protocols will be, but we had protocols before, now we think more in APIs, application programming interfaces, and instead of dedicated hardware, we're using orchestrated resources, so network functions become virtualized, and the network itself becomes a slice. Some architectural principles that we set ourselves in order to steer the work, in order to be sure we are guided by the right mission. So control plane and user plane should always be separated. The functions should have a modular design. Again, services instead of procedures. The network functions should directly communicate with each other. We have access independence, so you can have different accesses, you will see this later. Capabilities of the core should be exposed by default, and a unified authentication framework. Then we have some essential capabilities. These are practically there. You expect them by default from a network or from a mobile network, and you need to keep them in mind when you talk about 5G. So when we're talking about, for example, later on service-based architecture, it all looks maybe very straightforward, but you have to keep in mind we have to be mobile. Roaming needs to be enabled. We want to enable voice calls via IMS. SMS obviously is there. We have to provide reliable emergency telecommunication services. Mobile network sharing needs to be there. We need the interworking with the legacy and again the framework for authentication. Okay, so now I said already I'm not a RAN guy, so I have the unbelievable amount of a single slide talking about radio access network. Apologies for that, but I think it shows sort of the main thing that we're doing. So what we're defining at the moment, or what the RAN groups define at the moment, is a new radio, and that's how they really call it, new NR, new radio. That will be the new access, so like LTE is now, NR will be in the future. And we make sure that this can be deployed either together with LTE, where LTE takes the leading role for mobility and for roaming, and then as a supplementary access, the new radio is there practically providing more bandwidth. This can be connected to the EPC, so to the 4G core, and that's what we call non-standalone scenario. And then obviously we also have standalone scenarios where the UE either connects via 4G or 5G radio towards the 5G core. That means that you can deploy the new radio without deploying the new core. It also means you can deploy the new core without the new radio, but I guess this is not a deployment scenario that will happen too soon. So just to see, we really see this as a step-by-step approach. So this non-standalone scenario that I said here, this will be already, has a deadline for December 2017. So by December this year, the new radio needs to be defined in a way that it can be a supplementary access for this non-standalone scenario. Another mission we have is access independence and protocol harmonization. So the 5G core can serve several access networks. So the new radio, LTE, we said this already, but also so-called non-3GPP access. Broadband Forum defines the fixed access, Wi-Fi, WiMAX, and so on. And so far, we were able to do this as well, but we had dedicated interfaces for the non-3GPP access. This is not the case anymore in 5G. We harmonize this interface. It sounds maybe very easy. It's a major task, and it had a long discussion until we took that decision. So for control plane, we use the N2 interface. For user plane, the N3 interface. And as said, the protocols there will be harmonized. And then the main issue I want to talk about is the transformation of the core network. So on the one side, you see the functional, the core that we have so far, the 4G or 3G core. It's basically made of functional entities that have dedicated interfaces between them. And on these interfaces, there are dedicated protocols, different protocols for different types of communication. We had a single core that needed to serve all the requirements that customers had. And that was the scenario so far. Now, with 5G, we do the big transformation. So we think services, we virtualize the core, the internal communication between the functional entities will be based on APIs, so we will not have dedicated protocols anymore for different communication types. We will harmonize the protocols, expose the services and functions, and we will separate control and user plane. This service-based architecture a bit in more detail. So the main thing here is that's practically the control plane that is handling this whole API issue. So not everybody is happy with calling it a message bus, but for simplicity, let's just call it a message bus that will be there between the functional entities now. And those communicate via APIs with each other. So we have access control function and so on. So we have different functions in the network that can either be there physically or by means of virtualization, and they communicate in a harmonized way. Topics under discussion for this service-based architecture at the moment is, for example, what is a service? How should we structure the services? Is a function by its own already a service? Is a single protocol procedure that we have so far seen as a service? That's under discussion, it's not decided yet. We are also looking into different services and API frameworks, for example, RESTful. Also, this is something we currently discuss. The protocols for transporting these APIs are also currently under discussion. So we have the different flavors of HTTP, either on QUIC or TCP and TLS or diameter. We have a specification in CT4 as well as in CT3 where we're evaluating these protocols. Now, I can only say this work is very likely to end up in something where we will have requirements towards the protocol we choose in the end. So most likely there will be something coming out of this that we bring to IETF and ask for your support in order to make this happen in the way we need it. Then so these APIs that I was talking now about, these are the core internal ones, right? They are not open to the outside world. So this is when I talk service-based architecture, this is really how the functional entities in the network communicate with themselves, something that the operator has under control. Now we're also talking northbound APIs. Those are the APIs that we expose to the outside world, to the third parties. On concrete way, we are currently working on for one M2M on APIs under headline of NAPs, and in more general way, we're looking into we started a study in SA6 where we're practically looking how we could do this APIs, the whole exposure thing, in a generic manner and in a common manner for all different services. Another issue that I want to go quickly to is network slicing. We had a presentation on network slicing already yesterday in net slices, so I removed a number of slides now from here because I think those people who are interested are practically aware of it. A network slice by means of 3GPP, at least when we come to the core network, is an end-to-end network. So we really look at the radio network and the core. This is one slice, right? And this is something you can provide either for a specific service, let's say cars that want to communicate, or for a dedicated customer, for example, the police in a country that needs an emergency network. And that means that all the resources that are there are granted for them, so nobody else will use this network, but this also means it's really a network by its own. It's like you have nowadays a network of a service provider here somewhere in Europe. You would then have dedicated slices as own networks existing for these services and customers. So they comprise the core network, the radio access network, but also in the next step, non-3GPP access networks. So for example, fixed networks can also be sliced as long as they offer this capability. We will integrate that. And then a single UE can connect to maximum of 8 slices in parallel. These slices, they are differentiated by different slice types that we call STT. And you can have you can define many different slice types. We have standardized so far 3. The one is for enhanced mobile broadband, the other one ultra reliable low latency communication, and the last one for massive IoT. There's especially in the requirement specification that I mentioned before, you will find very dedicated requirements on latency and so on for these different slice types. So there we practically have a very clear specification already. Okay, to end this technical overview, one of the things that's important is what we are designing now. Release 15, I said this timeline, September 2018. I mean, don't be shocked by that. In the end, it means this will be the first step towards a new network. And this network will evolve on and on and on. So it's designed to be modular and an open system. What we drop in 2018 will be further developed in the future. And we will have incremental changes, we will make them possible, so that's what we understand by forward compatibility. If we, for example, for HTTP as a transport decide to use TCP and TLS, now in release 15, in release 16 we could anytime replace it by QUIC. Somebody, of course, needs to do the related specification work, but the system will not be written in stone for all time just because we have this deadline now. So this is just the beginning of 5G, and we should think about this when we talk about the collaborations that we could have and how we go on in the future. So let's talk about this collaboration a bit between IETF and 3GPP. So what did we do so far? Well, we had a lot of things that we worked on together. First of all, there's a lot of protocols that we are reusing from IETF. Some of them maybe you're not even aware of. So obviously we use DNS, DHCP, TCP, and so on. So these are all protocols that need to be there in an end-to-end architecture for an internet-based architecture. And we also work together more actively on what we call IMS, or what you have in different working groups as SIP, SDP, and so on, and IPv6, and so on. I say, my view of that is, it's like a good, long marriage that you have here, right? You need to have a way to have your fights, but in the end, the outcome is something that works. I think this is what we really achieved. So we had our discrepancies in the beginning, also sometimes on the way, but we find a mode of operation that really makes it possible that we can bring our requirements here, that people try to understand them and bring solutions that we can reuse in our architecture. Nevertheless, there are some challenges. So the strict release deadlines that we have, those are something that so far didn't bother us too much, because when we talked about IMS, the deployment was always sort of further in the future. So even if we closed the release, some of the drafts that IETF were working on were still not completed. We didn't have an RFC number, right? So they're lingering on. So we're calling them dependencies. And we have dependencies open already, or still in release 10 and release 12, so very far back releases that we already closed. Still, we are waiting for drafts to become RFCs. The problem with 5G is we shouldn't do this anymore. At least for 5G, the deadlines that we have are very, very strict. The industry is really looking at us. All the stakeholders are looking at us. They're practically saying we want a deployable product by the end of 2018. So if we have drafts that are still open, that would sort of harm us. That's what I mean for the immediate step, for the release 15, right? So we have to be aware that if we go into a massive form of collaboration where we practically say you create a lot of drafts that you would expect already to be part of release 15, this might even harm the collaboration in the end, because it would sort of endanger the trust that we have mutually. So my idea would be, we have the deadlines, we can't change anything. You have an open-ended process where you practically say the drafts have to be developed in a form that they really work as a solution and that they're the best solution that's currently possible. So let's respect this, but then try to collaborate in a different way, at least in the beginning. We also have a lack of 3GPP participation in IETF. We have quite a number of people who are interested in SIP and related issues, but still it could be more. But for 5G, we're really lacking people here that have the 3GPP background and coming here. As I said, we have so many meetings per year, it's not too easy to send people also to IETF. And then another issue that I found during the last few weeks is if you want to discuss an issue, for example, low latency, you have such a lot of experts here in IETF, but also in 3GPP. They are distributed over many groups. So it's extremely hard to bring all the experts into one room and say, let's talk about this. Takes some time, takes a lot of organization. So how should we approach this collaboration? We should investigate possible solutions early and together. So we have ideas on the way. As I said, we're looking into HTTP and diameter as possible transports for the API. So yeah, we haven't decided yet, but it would be good to start talking about this already. I'm not saying that we're making formal contributions on that, but we need to get wiser on these things. We need to understand better what's your background when you're talking about these protocols and these architectures in order to integrate them better into our system. It would be very good if we could exchange expertise so that some of your experts, for example, with a good background in REST or in Young, could visit our meetings and give sort of an introductory presentation about this in order to educate our guys a bit better on the backgrounds that you have. The same thing, of course, could happen from our side, that we send technical experts who talk about more why we have certain requirements and looking at certain solutions. For release 15, as I said, we have a very clear deadline. So let's constrain the collaboration to really the requirements that we have. If something on the way comes up in 3GPP, we will raise the flag immediately, and then we have to see how to achieve this. And if you have any new ideas that you want to see in release 15, then you need to bring them directly to 3GPP. It's sort of, if you start working on issues here in IETF, until you have finished them here and then bring them to 3GPP, the way is too long. So that's for release 15. Beyond release 15, we can envision any sort of cooperation that we want. I think we would need workshops on dedicated issues. We need to look a bit more into issues, for example, as said, low latency, APIs, and so on, and find out the right people to sit together. And that's the vision. It's a bit cheesy, right? But that's what we should aim for. If we achieve it with 3 hearts, I don't know, but maybe 2 will work. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. And as said, we have now Q&A. I think Eric and Lionel and myself will be available. And we try to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Just a reminder to folks to say their names when they come up to the thing. And I noticed you talked about it as if we were an old married couple. I do have to warn you, the IETF is a bit polygamous in that sense. We also have other partnerships, and I like the fact that there's a third heart to be filled in who that's associated with as we go.
This was just about our relationship, right? We didn't talk about the side steps and so on.
So I think Suresh at the back mic was first.
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So specifically on slide 31, so there was one which said the requirements need to be done first, the idea and so on. And I want to point out that was like specifically no longer true. Okay, so some of the work used to work that way, but we in the IESG have specifically stated that this is not how we want things done. So there's like actually a written statement that we published last year, which says like work on the solution work, right? Like requirements may or may not necessarily do that, but like don't get on the requirements to solution work.
Okay, thank you.
So I think I'd like to ask, let's drain back here with Eric and just the one queue, that's okay. So
Eric Horn, Android. Will you entertain a technical question about network slicing?
If we can answer it.
Well, my question was just for my clarification. Can a device be connected to multiple network slices at the same time? And would, for example, from the perspective of a cell phone, would the IMS network be considered a slice?
No, the IMS network would be part of the slice, because we would have the core network and the radio network as one slice, right? And IMS can be assumed as part of the core network. So you can do other things with the slice if you want, so it's not necessary to have a separate slice for IMS. That was the second question. The first question, one device can be connected to 8 slices in parallel. There is a certain restriction, they need the same access management function, but besides that, yes, that can be done.
Because I'm trying to map this onto something that we're working on called provisioning domains, which you may be familiar with regards to 7556 or something. 7556. Okay. There's provisioning domain work going on in interior airports and other places. It seems like it might work with this concept, but I fear I'm missing something extra special about slices. And that's just a comment. And the last comment is another thing, although it's probably too late for scheduling purposes, is I believe the IETF and IEEE sort of had a co-located back-to-back meeting at one point. Yes. It might be possible to consider the same thing.
So what we're doing is when we're planning our calendar, we try to keep the IETF meetings free so that we don't have meetings, at least with those groups who are participating or have interest in IETF. And we tried for a while to have them at least back-to-back on the same landmass. Like when you're in North America, we also try to be in North America. It doesn't always work. For example, for Singapore meeting, we have a week in between and we will be in US, but practically there are possibilities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Jim Reed. You said in one of your slides that new ideas must be brought to 3GPP. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on how that would be done? What would be the procedure? Can random members of the public submit contributions to 3GPP, or could someone from the IETF need to go through the IETF liaison to throw something over the wall to you guys? How would that work in practice?
So first of all, what I mean with new ideas need to be brought, I really meant release 15. That was the emphasis where I put this here. So this is practically for the next year. If you have a bright and shiny idea that should be done in release 15 right now, if you start working on this here, or we have other bodies that start working on 5G issues that they thought they can put into our release 15, well, that didn't work because that did not reach us fast enough, right? And we also like in a sort of overload mode. Right. So receiving letters from the outside at the moment, people practically say, let's forget about the outside, let's get the system that we're currently defining straight. But if you have, first of all, if you're designing protocols here, if you're doing anything that you think is useful for 5G, most likely we will anyhow get aware of it because we need your solutions, right? It's not like we're trying to do everything on our own. We try to reuse the solutions that are done by IETF. The other thing is if you have something where you think there is either an interference or there is something that we are not aware of, writing on a liaison might be good. Contacting with Gonzalo or with me, at least I try to be at every IETF meeting if possible, is another possibility. Most of the times the communication on this is problematic because people here don't know the working groups in 3GPP and people in 3GPP don't know how your structure here works. Yeah. That's not a problem. That's why we're here. So please contact us and we try to establish the right contact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Eric, you want to say something? Sorry.
So informing 3GPP actors is one thing, but taking action in 3GPP really means participation. So either that means working through an organization that you work with, or it means becoming a 3GPP member organization. I mean, that sounds quite onerous, and perhaps someone who works at a university wouldn't have an opportunity to do that. But many of the actors that are engaged here are also engaged in 3GPP, and so if you work with those people, that's the best way to start.
Thank you. Yes.
Robert Sparks. In the middle of your presentation, you highlighted a spot where you expected work to come to the IETF soon, where you were going to be asking for help. Can you quantify soon?
Yes and no. So I guess the decision on which protocol to take for this service-based architecture will sort of be taken around September this year. And let's assume, just assume for the moment, it would be HTTP2 on via TCP and TLS. Then for the core internal communication, we have overload scenarios. We have proxying scenarios, things that we either not sure if HTTP2 fulfills them or whether they can be added. So that would be the moment where we would then really get into communication. So I guess you can, for the last quarter of this year, assume that we will come with questions. Whether these questions are easy to answer or whether you say, oh guys, go home, this is nothing we can do here, that's something different. We will see it then, right?
And what you're expecting to come with are questions, and I'm going to poke a bit at what Suresh said, requirements towards solutions, but not solutions that you're just looking to have published.
I think especially for these things, we are not in the position to already come up with solutions.
Right.
I mean, we're working on SIP for a very long time already, that some people have immediately an idea on how to do a solution in 3GPP, yes, because they know SIP inside out, right? Might not always be the solution you have envisaged. But for HTTP, I think we would have to really come, we only have the chance to formulate our requirements and nothing more at the moment.
Okay, and then I would like to clarify what Suresh came to the mic to say. Suresh, I don't know where you went. You said working groups don't work on requirements now. I don't think that's what you meant to say.
No, I think what he actually said was that you're not required to create a requirements document before working on the solutions.
You can work on them in parallel, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jari Eriksson, and thank you for leaving this or having that particular slide there right now, because that was what I was also going to ask about, and you more or less already answered what I was going to ask, which was about what kind of work are you thinking of possibly coming here, if you can foresee that. And I want to press that a little further in your discussions you guys have had. So I can think about multiple different things here. So one category of work is, gee, you are using these nice protocols, but the base protocol doesn't have some feature that you need to add some capability or function to the base, say HTTP2. Or it could be a discussion of how do you use HTTP2 to achieve, I don't know, overload situation, or handle that kind of thing. Or it could be standardization of some APIs on top. Let's say when you want to do authentication in a 5G environment with on top of these protocols carrying HTTP2, for instance. This is how you do it. This is how the JSON looks like when you do that. Which of those things were you thinking of, or all of them?
All of them.
I leave it to Lionel because he's the chair of that working group.
Yeah, Lionel, all of them. Actually, the list that you are listed is already, so in the time being we're defining the set of key requirements that will be needed to select the right protocol. And based on this selection, we will see the gap between what the protocol is proposing and what is needed or missing to be able to achieve all the requirements listed before. So, for instance, if it is decided to use HTTP2, and as you said, for instance, for authentication, we need to be able to convey EAP frames and so on, we will see how it will be performed, and in that case, we will have discussion with IETF. But yes, low latency, overload control, all this kind of stuff.
Right, and I'll just add one more thing, and thank you for the answers. They're very clarifying, and for this session also. The one thing that I would add is that often it's quite useful when you think about like this open, flexible architectures that you make more explicit decisions about what's standardized and what's not standardized, and sort of like for you guys probably it's a crucial thing that you make the right choice there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Stuart Cheshire, Apple. In recent years, people like Jim Geddes and Dave Tatt have done a lot of good work raising awareness of buffload. And historically, LTE networks have had multiple seconds of buffering. And when you have a multi-second queue, a DNS lookup takes multiple seconds, a TCP handshake takes multiple seconds. It feels like using a dial-up modem. We have networks today that are 1,000 times faster than dial-up modems, but they don't feel 1,000 times faster because of buffer bloat. I was very happy to see on your slides you had mention of ECN, explicit congestion notification, which I think everybody in this room knows about. It means instead of dropping packets when there's congestion, you mark them, saves the cost and delay of retransmission. I'm seeing thumbs up there, thanks. What worries me is I've been hearing there's a faction in 3GPP pushing to remove ECN support and instead replace it with something else, which is a one-hop negotiation over the radio link for audio codec selection, which is a very odd either-or choice to have because ECN is an end-to-end solution where any hop on the path where a bottleneck exists and a queue is forming can signal that. A one-hop negotiation over the radio link, I understand 3GPP is very focused on the radio link, but that is often only the last hop of a 30-hop path across the internet. So I wondered if you knew anything about that or if you could comment on it.
I personally don't know about it. I don't know. So the thing is, in every standards body, there are factions, right? So I don't know how, but whoever, yeah?
So there was work in the transport area to enhance ECN, and I led an effort to basically poll all the different working groups to identify whether those changes would require any changes or would be incompatible. This is not an answer to your question, but the point is that we take ACN seriously in 3GP.
Thank you.
Alan Chun, I can answer your question. In the 3PP, we have designed some mechanism to use the ECN. The basic function is something like provides my ECN to the endpoint. Endpoint can change his code tag. So it's not an inglorious ECN. It's used by 3PP to change dynamically the codec, but to end of the communication end.
I'm sorry.
Let's take it offline.
Yeah, okay.
Is that okay? That I think that, but if there's something, it's good that we got aware of it. Thank you.
Hi, Niels ten Oever, Article 19 in the University of Amsterdam. You need to be an organizational member and pay considerable fees to partake in the 3GPP process, which makes it practically impossible for any academics and civil society to take part in that standards process. Have you got any suggestions in what ways we could participate in similar ways as we do here?
Yeah, directly no. Yes, it's correct. It's difficult, but using you need to be a member. So I don't have all the key issues, but for instance, being academic, you can be part of a project where you will have other vendors available there, and through this project you are able to submit contribution. And we have a lot of contribution done like that, either for the service architecture or even at the protocol level. So I know that for you it will be difficult to find the key, the entry point, but it's possible to do that, being part of a project, organization, or whatever.
Could you give leads on how that can practically happen?
To be part of, for instance, you have the European project where you have a bunch of projects targeting on 5G. Being part of this project will be an open door to this kind of to be able to provide contribution.
For example, on the railways, it's a different topic, I know, but on the railways there's currently ongoing several projects on the European level. And I'm in one of those groups. They're working out contributions that then the member companies that are sitting in that room and also sit in 3GPP will feed into 3GPP, right? So practically it's but this is done with many things because there's always like more people interested that are sitting in the actual 3GPP room. It's nothing that we can say is an official vehicle, how to do that, but that's a way of participating. Though I think, as far as I know from the topics you are coming from, I guess the IETF, if it's really like taking on the issues that you are highlighting and integrating them into the protocols, that might be something that would then also influence 3GPP on that way, right? But yeah, the real answer to what you said is no, as long as you're not a member organization or company, you can't participate in the meetings. That's the unfortunate truth, yes.
Ted Hardy from the floor. My day job is with Google. So I was very interested to see your description of service-based architecture and your answer to Eric, because I think there's been some confusion in the IETF side when we talk about network slices being associated with services. And that's because historically, in our interactions with some other SDOs, when people talked about services, they were talking specifically about the network as a service provider of something like voice, rather than the network as providing a set of quality of service guarantees or low latency guarantees, and that those would be available to what those folks would call over the top and what we would call applications. So I think it might be very valuable for us as two different groups, and this is why I got away from that, because I'm not volunteering the IAB to do it, but it would be very valuable, I think, to have a little bit of a clarification of some of the vocabulary, because I think both for yesterday when we were hearing people talking about how radio and core network approaches to what other groups might call resource-linked overlay networks and slices, that getting some of this vocabulary right might be a useful project once we get to the point where we start passing these requirements back and forth, because you don't have a lot of time. And if we're passing requirements back and forth, and each time we're restarting this conversation on what a service-based architecture means or what a slice is, we're going to spend time each time on something that we could kind of compact. So I think a bit of a primer from the 3GPP side to the IETF side as common vocabulary would be a welcome addition to the cooperation.
Well, I think we're all happy to do that, and this is a very good suggestion. I can only say that in 3GPP, as you see it here on the structure, at least SA2, SA5, RAN 2, RAN 3 are working on network slicing intensively. And even they struggle with getting the terminology aligned, right? So we are really in the process of getting there and also finding the right words, the right terms for describing what we have in our system or will have in our system. So that once we are there, I think next step really needs to be to align our vocabularies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörg, for the very good and useful presentation. I have a question regarding the cooperation, and maybe it's also directed to the ISG, I mean from the IETF side. For this cooperation, we'll need, of course, several maybe actions to be done. Suppose that 3GPP will come with requirements on maybe starting a working group or starting a work item. Will this process could be different than what is now? Could be, say, accelerated or not? So that is what I would like to hear from the ISG.
I don't want to speculate on that, whether we can accelerate the process. And as I said, we had already discussions with quite a number of people from the IESG and also within 3GPP, of course, on ideas how to accelerate things. My current guess is finding a more effective way takes time. So we will need a bit more of discussions on that. We see that there are different approaches that we can take. My hope is that once we have the first requirements, we have established a base where we currently, with this presentation, with Alicia's presentation, paving the ground for, so that we can talk openly about what we need without offending anybody and practically saying this is what we need, and IETF can say, well, this is what we can offer, and then we find a way together, I guess.
Hi, I'm Lars Eggert. You had a slide up that showed HTTP, TCP, TLS, and QUIC, which are some of our core internet protocols, and you talked about wanting to maybe make requirements towards them. Could you give me an example of what some of those requirements might look like? And I understand that you can't give a definitive answer, but just sort of a flavor.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, for example, that some of our functional entities in the core currently communicate via diameter. And there we have this proxying functionality. That is something that we assume might need to be there in the 5G service-based architecture as well. But we don't really see if this, at the moment, we don't really see if this is possible with, for example, HTTP2. So we first need to find out the right question to ask, but in sort of that realm, that could be one of the questions. Overload control could be another issue. So something in that direction. Whether then these things are something where you say, well, guys, you can define that on your own in 3GPP if it's really needed, or whether you say this is the domain of IETF and IETF needs to do that, I guess this will be find out once we have formulated them more clearly.
My feeling is the answer will be the latter, because these are some pretty core internet protocols, and it seems unlikely that we would, give some change control to 3GPP. But I also want to push back a little bit that there's an assumption here that any requirements that might come, the IETF would take on, and these protocols are important for many other things. So there's a balance here, right? And because they're important and because they're critical, I would like to hear early what the plans are, what in terms of requirements, rather than like later, especially since you guys have such a accelerated agenda compared to what we usually work on.
No, absolutely. I will give the mic to Lionel in a second, but I want to say, at least with SIP, we had these experiences that we sometimes went over the top from 3GPP and what we required. I think it needs a process where we talk with each other, where we maybe can shape our requirements in a different way so that they can be fulfilled by you and so on. But Lionel, I think you have more details.
So while Lionel's coming up, just let me say that we're due to close in 10 minutes. So if you needed to be in line, get in line very quickly because I'm about to close it.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to get the groan from the room, but I think SIP was the easy case because it didn't have nearly the deployment or importance at the time it was modified for 3GPP than these other protocols have right now and had for a long time. So if changes are coming or change wishes are coming towards these, right, be prepared for something that will make the SIP experience seem like a walk in the park.
So let me just push back on that from the front a little bit. So the whole point of having a meeting about cooperation is making sure we understand each other. And I think what we're trying to do here is to make sure that they understand that when they come with a set of problem spaces, which we sometimes call requirements, they're almost like use cases for a protocol. And that question may come to a group and say, hey, can you do this in time for release 15? And if the answer is no, they certainly understand. Sometimes the answer is going to be no. Then we can ask, is this a longer-term project that can go into a later release, or is this simply the wrong protocol choice and we need to help you figure out how to continue to use diameter for what you're using or to use something else as it comes? But we're trying to set this up so that we can give a relatively fluid answer in the short time, relatively quick answer in the short time frame, even if that's a quick no, not in this time frame. So, Alex?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
But it was my comment. It's the result for the study phase. The study phase is just to be able to identify a set of protocol, at least one, or probably, maybe several one, and to see the gaps in the requirement and so on, and to work on that, and to see if, for instance, using HTTP2 with additional requirement and so on is something that will be achievable in the release 15, and if not, what to do for the next release and what to do for this release. Thank you.
Alex Gallis from University College London. I like a lot of things which you said. However, I discovered two elements which are basically either a toolkit or additional elements to make your network a bit more flexible, because you are moving towards that end. I didn't hear anything about programmability. Openness and modularity is good, but not sufficient. Sooner or later, you need to change. If it's done by manually, this will go nowhere. Therefore, this is the best way to create yet another silo. So programmability has to be embedded. I didn't see anything. The second, even more important, embedded management of all the aspects which you mentioned in an integrated way becomes an essential means to achieve flexibility. And this cannot be retrofitted. I know that this is a chicken and egg situation, but I would like to highlight your views on this. Very important key element. If you can, please.
Absolutely. We have a group, SA5, that only looks, or that looks, besides other issues, on operation and maintenance and also orchestration. And they are looking, for example, for the slicing. They have own specifications on how to orchestrate, how to set up slices, how to modify them. They're of course not looking only in their own space, they are looking also into the work of ETSI and NFV is doing. Obviously, if work is done here on slicing, they will also look into that. So they're evaluating the solutions from outside. So we are not leaving programmability or orchestration behind. I just was focusing now on some of those issues where our work has progressed in a way like SPA or slicing, where we can make dedicated slides already, right? For the orchestration part, the work is currently starting, the normative work. They've finished their studies, and that work will evolve within the next few months more concretely.
So I'm cutting the line now.
Jarko Eriksson. So I wanted to continue a little bit the discussion that Lars started. So first of all, I agree with the framing that Ted had from the front, and I'll just add that like the IETF works and stuff, that the IETF community, including everybody who has some association with 3GPP and you guys, and what they think. So if there's something that we feel like now core protocols are useful new features, then of course we can work on that. But I also feel that there's like a philosophical differences how you go about doing some of these things. So one approach is that if you see tools that are sort of commonly usable in the world, you want to use them and you latch onto them. And you build on top, as opposed to the tool doesn't quite fit. Let's make the tool a slightly different shape. In some cases that may be needed, but in a lot of cases that's not needed. So people build like APIs of this sort all the time without needing extensions of the underlying protocols. So I'd be careful. I mean, at least there's a bar there that you don't go there if you really need that. And even if you don't need that, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no work between IETF and 3GPP in that space. We talked earlier about the three categories. Some of those other categories might be still relevant, where there's broader than 3GPP, broader than 5G applicability, and then it might make sense for the IETF to be also involved.
Thank you. On this issue, I really also want to state that what we are talking about here is really the core internal communication when we talk SPA or SPA protocols. So that really means this is something that would not be exposed to the outside world. This is something we do internally. So if we see anything that's not provided by the protocol, we will talk with you. And then we will find out how to best approach it. And I think this is, at the moment, what we can say. And yeah.
Dave Dolson. I guess a couple of points. One, we talked about 3G coming to IETF and with the idea, HTTP can't do this. How can we bend it to make it do this? Is there a process, maybe asking more the question of, we have this problem, what's the best protocol for it? There's a lot of different groups working on all sorts of things like interface to route, I2RF, and interface to network security, all these sort of things that people are working on. That might be a good question to ask.
Yeah. Maybe also, I can respond to that with this first question. Usually it's that way we evaluate this protocols, and usually it's also that way that the companies that are represented in 3GPP, they also have representatives in IETF. So the awareness of what IETF is currently working on is to a certain extent there, and then we can do the evaluation. Of course, we oftentimes need guidance, but then we ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, I find this list of protocols, as a software architect, I find this list really kind of unsatisfying. In the sense that you can do anything over HTTP, and you can do different applications in diameter. So, you know, there's protocols on top of these clearly that aren't presented. Like,
yeah, but this is not the full spec, right? Okay. We have a study that started in March, and that has, I don't know, Lionel, 50 pages, 100 pages already, where we just evaluate, right? So it don't say that these 4 bullets here show you the whole world what we are doing.
So we might see like diameter and then charging and also policy control and things like this. And then we
definitely.
might see.
Yeah. It will stay for certain tasks. We will further use diameter at least to a certain extent. Other issues can be maybe replaced by other protocols.
I guess I'm thinking more about the protocols on top, like.
So Dave, because we're very tight on time, can I ask you guys to continue this in the hallway?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just say that the procedures, so the actual communication requirements and what needs to be communicated has been defined, for example, in 23502. And that procedure, however, has no protocol bindings yet, and that's what they're looking at. So this is not an open-ended theoretical discussion. This is a very practical discussion of how do we support these procedures in a way that not only convey this information, but convey it according to all the constraints we have, which are numerous. Thanks.
Can you say that number again, please?
23.502. So I advertised 501, 502 is the procedural one.
Lionel Moran, Orange. Just to highlight again that so there is a focus on HTTP in the unified something those ring a bell. But as said by Georg and others, we will have also works to do on OEM, for instance, adaptability of a young model and so on authentication. SS3 is responsible for the security architecture, so if, for instance, HTTP is used, how to convey EAP and other type of authentication. Charging is another one. So, so even if there is nothing to do on HTTP2 and so on, for sure we will have some things to bring within IETF and to discuss with IETF guys on those IP-related protocols. And the key issue for release 15 is the fact that we need to have something available or available soon. We are aware of interesting work done, but we need something that will be available and in the product in March, in June 18 or September 18. It's not some, yeah, we have this target and this is a constraint for us. That's what. Thank you.
So I really want to thank you for taking the time to put together the presentation and also thank you for their contributions as well. And I want to thank everybody here who gave, obviously, setting up this cooperation is a long-term effort. There's going to be a lot of continuing work as we go forward in a bunch of different groups. But I really appreciate that all of you came today and helped us get at least the same page for the first page, as I'd like to put it. And we'll continue as we go forward. The next session is starting in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Ted, you posting the slides?
I'll figure out where they get posted. They'll go to the agenda as proceedings along the slide.